I'm not sure who to address it to, but could you go over the Q1, Q2, Q3 requirements?
I think you'll likely hear a lot more specifics about those requirements tomorrow. I don't know if you've got a particular question for today.
So that we don't steal any speaker's thunder for tomorrow, we'll hold that question till then. All right. And again, if you've got questions for any of the four panelists, please line up. Let's go ahead and take our first online question, please.
This question is for Amy. What is the difference between a GDUFA goal date and an action date assigned after the GDUFA goal date has been removed? Please provide examples of what can be expected to be received for each of these dates and the differences.
So I think maybe I can generalize that a little bit more, if that makes sense. But I think there's maybe the question in general is just what are the goals going to look like in GDUFA 2? Of course, I can't ask the person if that, but I think that covers what they're asking, right? Yeah? Okay, cool. Yeah, it is a little bit complicated. I'll go kind of like from the highest level. So basically the way to think about it is on October 1, 2017, you're kind of drawing a line in the sand. So if a submission, so if you had an ANDA or an ANDA amendment that was submitted prior to that October 1 date and it has a one goal date, that goal date will remain the same. That goal date will stay the same. So if you had an ANDA or an ANDA amendment, add date to goal date drawing. And the others, so I guess the other sort of box is what if your submission does not have a GDUFA 1 goal date and it does not have a TAD date, then the receipt date for that submission will be assigned as October 1, 2017. Does that sound right? I'll look to my lawyers. So that's sort of the highest level explanation. It's a good question.
Thank you very much. Next online question, please.
We received quite a few questions for the Nguyen Kimball team. And the first one, if the Orange Book includes a reference standard, but not an RLD, how do you determine what the RLD is?
If an applicant has trouble making that determination, and I'll note that there have been recently many updates to the Orange Book, and we continue to make updates to the Orange Book. But if an applicant has difficulty in determining their RLD and they know their reference standard, they can submit a controlled correspondence.
Next online question.
This question is for Elaine. A requirement for a joint Rems, could this mask manufacturing specific quality issue?
I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
Sure. A requirement for a joint Rems, could this mask manufacturing specific quality issues?
Could it mask quality issues? I'm not sure I understand. So it's still separate products. It's just that they're being funneled through a joint Rems. I'm not sure I understand the question. Does that answer the question?
Okay, whoever the online questioner was, real quick now in the QA pod, go ahead and submit clarification. And while we're waiting for that, we'll go ahead and go to microphone number 2 here in the room, please.
This question is for Elaine, and again regarding the Rems. When do you expect ANDA filer to start having a discussion with the NDA holder?
So it's never too soon. Given how difficult these negotiations can be, you get the notification from FDA after your application is filed. However, if you have the contact information for the RLD holder, there's no need to wait for that official letter from the FDA. You can reach out at any point. And then, if you haven't by the time we have that kickoff meeting, that will be your first opportunity.
I do have a follow-up, but I'll wait for my turn.
You only got one person to get behind there. Right over here is microphone number 1.
Yeah. My question is for Martha. This is for RLD access. Is there any process for obtaining samples where the restriction in getting the sample is not due to Rems, but it is due to self-enforced restricted distribution by the RLD holder?
That's a good question. We developed a guidance that addresses the protocol review process for the products that do have a Rems Itasu. We are aware of instances where there are voluntary restriction programs that are being imposed by the companies themselves. And in those cases, we do not review the protocols. We recommend that to the extent that you believe that's anti-competitive behavior, that you contact the Federal Trade Commission.
Thank you.
Okay, next online question.
This is for the Nguyen Kimball team. Can the excipients of an ANDA formula be different from the NDA or RLD formula?
I'll note that that's a pretty broad question. It depends on the specific product for which an applicant's seeking approval.
Okay, let's go with microphone number 1 and then over to microphone number 2. Microphone number 1. You were up a little bit.
This is for either Martha or Marika. Is there any way to change the strength specification for a generic drug after you've received approval?
You mean by specifications?
So the strength that's identified on the RLD, you'd have to match that, right? So at some point in the future, as the clinical demand has changed, is there a way to amend our ANDA to accommodate a different strength?
So if there's a different approved strength for your RLD, then you could submit a new strength amendment or supplement depending on where you are in the application process. If you're trying to seek approval for a strength that isn't otherwise approved, then you would need a suitability petition.
Okay, thank you.
Nice and close for me, please.
Hi, this is for Elaine. Are there any Rems expectations for API producers? For instance, if a ANDA holder wants to change their API, would the API producer be expected to supplement or assist in any Rems studies?
If they want to explain a little bit more what the situation you're talking about.
So when the API manufacturer is filing a DMF,
Yeah.
typically they don't add an REM, a Rems to that. However, if an ANDA holder is trying to change API from their initial submission, so they would need to do a PAS to update their amendment with a new API. The API could have been part of that initial Rems investigation. Would the API manufacturer be liable for part of that investigation?
I'm not sure how that plays. Do you have a sense of how that plays into the Rems context? I'm not sure how that would play into the development of a Rems.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, let's take an online question and then we'll come back here. Next online question, please.
Sure. This question is for Elaine. If there is a patent covering the Rems for the brand product, how does FDA determine the impact, or what impact does it have?
So this happens with some frequency, that there's an aspect of an innovator's Rems that's protected by a patent. There is one of the two ways that you can get a waiver is if there is a patent on an aspect of the Rems and you certify that you tried to get a license to it and were unsuccessful. So we don't get into the details of we don't weigh in on any patent litigation that might be going on, but we do take note of whether an ANDA applicant tried to get a license to a patent when we consider a waiver.
Okay, microphone number 1, please.
Sure. This question is for Amy. In in your presentation, you mentioned that in GDUFA 2, FDA will be issuing DRL letters. So in that one, how many disciplines industry like FDA is considering? Whether it will be OPQ, discipline review letter, OGD review letter, or it will be more granular, like drug substance completeness, or it will go to that level. So
just to repeat the question, so when we're talking about the discipline review letters that will be issued at or around the mid-cycle point, what review disciplines are we thinking about specifically?
that's right.
Okay, cool. I think I would like to phone a friend in the audience. Ted?
There's 3 disciplines for the primary application at the midpoint, right? So you're looking at discipline review letter. So the key discipline is going to be Office of Pharmaceutical Quality, right? They're going to cover all the quality review components. And it's going to be the Office of Bioequivalence, more traditional bio studies if there's a clinical component, in some cases maybe even a pharma tox type of component. And then the third discipline, you'll hear more about tomorrow, will be labeling. So for 99% of the applications, the big 3 are going to be OPQ, bio, and labeling.
Thank you, Ted.
Next question here at microphone number 1.
Hi, this question is for Elaine. Elaine, given the importance of a single share system for the REMS, to what extent can your office or the FDA help to facilitate a consensus amongst not only the brand company but also amongst the generic companies? Because that's where I foresee a lot of friction amongst consensus.
That's interesting. Yeah, we spend most of our energy focusing on the potential for friction when it's an NDA versus the ANDAs. But you're right, it can happen also in the development of a waived system by a bunch of ANDAs. Although, in my experience, that has been a much easier process than the generic and the innovators working together. As far as what we can do, as I said in my presentation, there's certainly a limit. We don't pass judgment on any of the specific business agreements that are being worked on. So if the companies are having trouble agreeing on a voting rights structure, not going to say this structure is better than that structure. But we do make very clear that we're looking at how the process is going and that we're going to make a decision about a waiver based in part on that process. And you'll see from, we've granted 3 waivers in the past, and in each of those 3 cases, we've articulated our rationale for doing so, and at least 2 of those are publicly available. And you'll see that a lot of that is an analysis of, how the negotiations have gone and whether, again, whether the burden of developing the single shared system has outweighed the benefits of having them.
Microphone number 2, please.
Yeah. My question is to Martha, and this is regarding the agency's guidance for industry, which is related to referencing the reference listed drug in the like the ANDA submission, which is dated January 2017. In that, one condition has been mentioned that if a reference listed drug is not available in the market because of not because of the safety and efficacy reason, if the RLD has been discontinued, the bioequivalence study can be conducted on the reference standard, which is now very well available in the Orange Book. But there is a second condition mentioned which state that only the bioequivalence should be established based on the reference standard. Other characterization studies, like a physico-chemical comparison with the reference drug, has to be done against the RLD. Now, given a situation that RLD is not available in the market, how is that condition going to get fulfilled?
I'll answer that. I think the intention of that statement is that in all respects you're going back to the original reference listed drug as the sort of target for sameness. So if there's restrictions on differences in formulation, those would be compared to the RLD. If there is labeling, for example, is compared to the RLD's labeling, not the reference standards labeling. To answer your question a bit more specifically, there may be instances in which you can use comparative data between a reference standard and your proposed ANDA product to establish physical, chemical, or other characteristics of your product, but the ultimate aim is to establish sameness to the RLD, not sameness to the reference standard. Does that answer your question?
But if at all the RLD is not available in the market, how does that fulfill the submission requirement in terms of including that as a part of quality overall summary and other modules? If the RLD is not at all available in the market.
Right. And so you're to the extent you need to actually have physical product against which you're doing comparative studies. That physical product can be, if there is it can be the reference standard if there is a reference standard. But ultimately, the determination is sameness with respect to the RLD.
We've got about 10 more minutes left for questions. If there's any more questions in the room, come on up to the microphone. Let's take the next online question, please.
This question's for Team Kimbrell. When, if we want to develop an ANDA product for Desi or another unapproved drug product, what are the ways to do that?
That again, please.
If we want to develop an ANDA product for a Desi or unapproved marketed drug product, what are the ways to do that?
So in order to seek approval of an ANDA referencing a product, the product you're referencing does need to be approved. So I think that sort of takes sort of care of, I think, half of that question, if I'm understanding it correctly. Desi products are listed products like any other. So if it's a reference listed drug, you can seek approval the same way as any other.
This question could be either to Martha or Marika on suitability petitions. Knowing that there is a suitability petition backlog and knowing that the suitability portion of review is captured in the GDUFA 2 commitment letter, what efforts has the FDA taken to kind of resolve that issue, either prior to GDUFA 2 or during GDUFA 2?
So I can speak to that specifically in that my division, among others, coordinating with an OGD, does actually coordinate review of suitability petitions. And I acknowledge your comment and acknowledge that because of resource restraints and other factors historically, there have been suitability petitions that have not been answered and that are waiting answers, and even before the GDUFA 2 negotiations commenced, OGD internally made commitments to, as resources became available, to increase work and focus on those questions, and we're continuing to do that. And with GDUFA 2 coming and the mention of suitability petitions in the commitment letter, we are working to improve those processes over time.
My question is to Ms. Ellen Lipman. It is our best understanding that the agency is now expecting the manufacturer of immediate release opioid analgesic product to have a REMS program. So recently, like almost 2 months back, there was a public workshop also organized by FDA, wherein they have asked to form an industry working group. What is the tentative timeline within which the IR manufacturer has to implement the REMS program for opioid analgesic products?
I don't know that I'm prepared to get into application-specific issues in this forum for a variety of reasons. I would encourage you, though, to reach out to the project manager associated with that program and ask your question there, because I think you'll get more complete information.
I'm coming more from a commercial manufacturer perspective, that if already we have a opioid analgesics in an immediate release dosage form, what is the agency's tentative timeline for implementation of REMS?
Again, I can't get into that right now. I mean, the answer is going to be, it's unclear anyway. That's a process that's very much under development right now. So I would encourage you to reach out to the project manager to see if you can get more information there.
Microphone number 1, please.
This is a question to Ms. Kimbrell. In following up with the online question regarding unapproved drugs, marketed drugs, or Desi, or whatever you want to call them, they're not obviously approved drugs. So therefore, what would wouldn't that be an NDA route?
You mean seeking approval as a Desi, or seeking approval?
No, seeking approval, period. I mean, obviously, you can't manufacture Desi or unapproved marketed drugs as of September of 2011 or something like that. Or they're trying to minimize the commercialization of that, or you can't introduce any new unapproved marketed drugs. So in order for I believe the agency is asking industry to get these approved in a regulatory manner, and I thought the pathway would be an NDA pathway.
So yeah, an unapproved drug would be an NDA pathway. Yeah.
I mean, I was just clarifying that.
Yeah.
This is another question for Team Nguyen Kimbrell. For an RLD that is under a closed distribution system, is there a provision for obtaining sufficient RLD for Q1, Q2, Q3 assessments, similar to the system in place for obtaining supply for BE?
I just want to clarify, what is a closed distribution system? That's a voluntary restrictive distribution program? Let's just assume that it is. If there's not a REMS ETASU associated with the RLD product, and it's a restriction that is being imposed by the RLD holder itself, we recommend that the generic applicant contact the FTC if it believes that behavior is anti-competitive.
All right, microphone number 1, please step up nice close.
Can you hear me? Steve Smith from Advent Engineering Services. This question is for Elaine. You mentioned that the FDA will hold a kickoff meeting for establishing the shared system REMS, discussing planning and timing. And I was wondering what maybe you give us some background of, like, what are the thought processes that go into the timing decisions, and then what are the consequences to the firms involved if that timing isn't met?
When you say timing, you're talking about the milestones that we put forth at that kickoff meeting. Correct. For when we.
Correct.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There are a lot of factors that go into it. For one, we have solicited a lot of feedback from industry and REMS vendors about what is a reasonable time frame. How quickly can these programs be developed? And we've taken that feedback, and that's been one factor. Another factor, quite honestly, is the GDUFA clock, and the fact that we don't want to delay the entry of generic competition past those commitments. So we take a number of factors into consideration, reasonableness, speed, and we request that these companies, comply with those. Now, they're not regulatory requirements or statutory requirements that those deadlines be met. However, we factor in, if they are missed, we factor that into a decision whether or not to grant a waiver, for example.
Microphone number 2, please. Step up nice and close.
So questions related to Rems. So as science progresses, part of it is that there's that opportunity to really to get rid of the Rems, right? And a lot of brand sponsors initiate this. Being that it's a shared system, looking into the future, is it still going to be held that this brand sponsor is going to be leading these activities, or since it's under one shared system that the generics can evaluate it as well from the ANDA side and kind of make their assessment, make their proposals to release the Rems?
So the question is, if you have a shared system, can both the ANDAs and the NDAs, can either side propose the release of a REMS? And sure, ANDAs can do that as well. They would have to put forth a rationale for why it's not needed, and the agency would evaluate that the same way it would if an NDA requests it. And I'll note that the determination for releasing a REMS doesn't need to be based on a request from the sponsors at all. It can be agency initiated. We get assessments on the REMS and how they're working, and we look at factors out in the healthcare system, and we can determine on our own that a REMS is no longer needed.
Okay, next in the microphone, please, go ahead.
My question is for Marika. This is regarding Q1, Q2 formulations. If NDA holder has updated the formulation, that is not because of safety and efficacy reason, can as an ANDA applicant, I can refer the old formulation that is marketed by the ANDA?
You're working off of the assumption that your product has to be Q1, Q2.
No, but NDA has updated the formulation.
Yeah.
So we cannot make same Q1, Q2, but of course that is not the reason of the safety and efficacy.
Yes, we have in the past allowed an ANDA applicant to submit an application to an RLD for a parenteral product, for example, where there is a Q1, Q2 requirement, referencing seeking the approval effectively for the old formulation. But I'll note that there's only one approved formulation at a time. So the new formulation is the approved formulation.
Okay.
And the analysis that we undertake is that an applicant can seek what's a 314.99 waiver, a waiver of the regulatory requirement for Q1, Q2. We have approved some in the past for old formulations exactly in the circumstances that you've outlined, which is if the RLD has been reformulated, but not for safety or effectiveness reasons.
Okay. And can I ask second question?
Is it tiny?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So in that case, if whatever you explain, agree with you. In that case, can we refer the RS instead of RLD for my comparisons and BE study?
In that instance, I'm assuming it's a parenteral product. The governing formulation will always be the RLD formulation.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'm going to close out with one last online question for our 800 online folks, please.
This question is for Amy. What information needs to be submitted in pre-submission facility correspondence? Can this be submitted for any ANDAs, or is it only applicable to complex drug products?
Question was in the context of a pre-submission facility correspondence, what kind of information should be submitted? And does it only apply to complex products? Okay. So to address the second part, so PFC actually is not related to complex products in that way. So the PFC is really tied into getting priority review. So it can be a complex or a non-complex product. So I think that kind of addresses the first part, or the second part. To the first part, for what information, basically the letter itself outlines some more specifics about the PFC. So it's actually in the, I always like to reference the letter because I know everyone's already memorized it, right? But there's some good definitions in the back. So I'm just finding it here. Okay, of course now I can't find it. But, oh, here it is. Okay, because it's like not alphabetical order. But here we go. So basically, it's the manufacturing. So it's regarding the facilities that have to do with manufacturing and testing. And it's also information regarding sites or organizations that have to do with bioequivalence and clinical studies. So this would be information regarding like the facility name, the operations performed there, contact information, the FEI number, DUNS number. It goes on and on. So it's like basically, I would just reference folks to look exactly at the letter for that.
Okay.
Or did you want to add?
Yeah,
something,
please.
Martha?
Yeah. Thing to that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Just we are in the process of developing guidance that will explain more what type of information will be submitted. The basic parameters